Millionaire cruelly abandons his beloved after learning she can't have children. 5 years later, he froze upon seeing her with twins at a restaurant. He approached. Benjamin Harrison adjusted his tie, the crisp fabric feeling like a noose tightening around his neck. The grand ballroom buzzed with the chatter of New York's elite, each conversation soaked in ambition and expectation. Crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceiling, casting shimmering reflections on the marble floors. It was a night of celebration, another successful merger, another testament to the Harrison family legacy. But for Benjamin, it felt hollow. He took a sip of his champagne, the bubbles bitter on his tongue. His father, Charles Harrison, was holding court at the center of the room, his deep voice booming with pride. "And none of this would have been possible without my son Benjamin." A round of applause erupted. Faces turned towards him with admiration, envy, and thinly veiled scrutiny. Benjamin forced a smile, nodding in acknowledgement. The weight of those expectations pressed against his chest, suffocating. He was the heir to a dynasty built on steel and finance, a man groomed from birth to expand the empire. Success wasn't an option. It was a requirement. "Benjamin," his mother's voice sliced through the din. Margaret Harrison, elegant in her emerald gown, leaned in close. "You need to mingle more. The Vanderharts are here tonight, and you know how important they are for future investments." "Of course, Mother," he replied, his voice clipped. She patted his shoulder with a manicured hand and disappeared into the crowd, a master at navigating social obligations. He sighed and stepped away from the throng, the edges of the room offering a brief respite. His eyes scanned the sea of tuxedos and gowns, but his mind wandered elsewhere, to a different world, a simpler one. The memory of warm brown eyes and an infectious laugh tugged at the edges of his consciousness. Megan. The thought of her was like a whisper of wind on a stifling day. He closed his eyes for a second, the image of her in her worn jeans and cotton sweaters more vivid than any glittering diamond in the room. She'd grounded him, made him feel like a person rather than a figurehead, but memories of her were tangled with guilt and regret. "Lost in thought, Benjamin." A familiar voice pulled him back. His cousin, Alexander, stood beside him, a smirk on his lips. Alexander was the same age as Benjamin, but where Benjamin was disciplined and polished, Alexander was loose and reckless. "Just taking a breather," Benjamin muttered. Alexander's eyes gleamed with mischief. "You know, sometimes I wonder if you actually enjoy all this. The prestige, the power. Isn't this the dream?" Benjamin's jaw tightened. "It's the family expectation. Same thing, isn't it?" Alexander's voice dropped, his tone more serious. "We're not allowed to want anything different." Benjamin didn't reply, because what he wanted, what he had wanted, wasn't part of the plan. He thought of Megan again, of the night he'd broken her heart. Her face had crumpled in confusion and pain when he'd told her they couldn't be together. "I need someone who can carry on the family name," he had said, the words tasting like ash even then. Her whispered, "I thought love was enough," haunted him still. "Benjamin," Charles's voice called across the room, pulling him back. "Come here, the Vanderharts are waiting." He nodded and made his way over, his steps deliberate, his face a mask of confidence. The Vanderharts, a couple in their 50s, smiled warmly as he approached. Pleasantries were exchanged. Discussions of market trends and investment opportunities flowed seamlessly. Benjamin played his role perfectly, the dutiful son, the sharp-minded businessman, but the emptiness gnawed at him. A waiter passed by with a tray of champagne, and Benjamin grabbed another glass, draining it faster than he should have. His mother shot him a look from across the room, disapproval mixed with concern. He ignored it, the lights, the applause, the expectations. All of it felt like a show he'd been performing for too long. The evening stretched on, each minute blurring into the next. By the time the last guest departed and the ballroom began to empty, Benjamin felt drained. He loosened his tie and stepped out onto the balcony, the cool night air a relief against his heated skin. The city sprawled beneath him, a tapestry of lights and lives. He wondered how many people down there were living authentically, not burdened by a legacy they never asked for. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a message from his father. "Well done tonight. We'll discuss the next steps in the morning." Benjamin clenched his jaw, the words grating against his tired mind. He stared at the skyline, the towering building symbols of success and entrapment. He thought of Megan again. Her smile, her warmth. What would his life be like if he had chosen her instead of the expectations? He shook the thought away, but it lingered, stubborn and persistent. The legacy was secure, but at what cost? Benjamin walked briskly down Fifth Avenue, the morning chill biting at his cheeks. The sun reflected off the towering glass buildings, but the warmth never seemed to reach him. He adjusted his overcoat, the leather soles of his shoes clacking against the pavement as he headed toward the Harrison Tower. His father's message from last night still weighed on him. "We'll discuss the next steps in the morning." It wasn't a request. It never was. He pushed through the revolving doors of the building, nodding mechanically at the security guard. The lobby was a symphony of polished marble and hushed efficiency. Executives in tailored suits moved with purpose, the air humming with ambition. He should have felt at home here, but the knot in his stomach tightened instead. As he entered the elevator, he caught his reflection in the mirrored walls. Dark hair perfectly styled, eyes sharp and calculating. The image of a man who had everything, except he felt hollow, like a perfectly wrapped box with nothing inside. The elevator doors slid open, and he stepped onto his office floor. His assistant, Melissa, greeted him with a stack of reports and a strained smile. "Your father is waiting in the conference room," she said, her voice a mix of empathy and professionalism. "Of course he is," Benjamin muttered, taking the reports and moving toward the glass-walled room at the end of the hall. He straightened his shoulders, masking his reluctance. The meeting was a blur of financial projections, strategic plans, and expansion targets. His father's voice droned on, confident and authoritative, mapping out Benjamin's future with the precision of a chess master. "And we'll finalize the merger with Goldtech by next quarter," Charles said, his steely eyes locking onto Benjamin's. "This is your legacy, son. Don't lose focus." Benjamin nodded. "I understand." But did he? His mind drifted to the memory of a different time, a different place. He remembered the scent of freshly brewed coffee, the hum of a cafe filled with laughter and the clinking of cups. He remembered Megan. He had met her on an ordinary afternoon 2 years ago during a rare break between meetings. He'd wandered into a small coffee shop tucked between towering skyscrapers, needing a moment of quiet. The place was warm, cozy, with mismatched chairs and faded wallpaper. She had been behind the counter, her brown hair tied back in a messy ponytail, a smudge of flour on her cheek. When she looked up and smiled, something inside him had shifted. It was a smile that reached her eyes, unguarded and genuine. "Double espresso?" she'd asked, her voice soft and melodic. He'd nodded, surprised that she hadn't flinched at his tailored suit and polished demeanor like so many others did. Instead, she treated him like anyone else. "Rough day?" she'd asked as she handed him his cup. "Something like that," he'd replied, almost laughing at the understatement. "Coffee helps," she'd said with a wink. He'd found himself returning to that cafe more often than he cared to admit. Each visit, they exchanged more than just pleasantries. She told him about her love for baking, how she worked long hours to support herself. He listened, fascinated by her world, a world where success was measured by small joys, not towering achievements. One rainy evening, as he waited out a storm with his coffee, she joined him at his table. They talked for hours, and he learned that her kindness wasn't naivety. It was strength. Her optimism wasn't ignorance. It was a choice. He'd fallen for her in those stolen moments, her warmth a balm to the cold, calculated world he inhabited. But love hadn't been part of his plan. The memory of the night he ended it was sharp. They'd sat on a bench in Central Park, the city lights reflecting in her eyes. He'd delivered his speech with the same precision he used in business deals, each word slicing through her heart. "I need someone who can give me a family, Megan. Someone who fits into my world." Her hands had trembled, her voice a whisper. "I thought I was your world." Her words haunted him, echoing in his mind as he sat in the conference room, his father's voice fading into static. He had traded warmth for ambition, love for legacy. "Benjamin," his father's voice snapped him back to the present. "Are you with us?" "Yes," he lied, his jaw tight. "I'm with you." The meeting adjourned, and Benjamin rose, his legs heavy. He needed air. As he walked out of the building, his phone buzzed, a notification from the coffee shop app, some automated reminder of a place he hadn't visited in over a year. He hesitated, his thumb hovering over the screen. Then, on impulse, he turned toward the cafe. The bell above the door chimed as he entered, the scent of coffee and cinnamon filling his lungs. The place looked the same, but the counter was empty. Someone else was working the espresso machine, a stranger in Megan's place. Disappointment settled in his chest like a stone. He had waited too long. Megan was gone. Just like the warmth she'd brought into his life, he turned to leave, the ache in his chest deepening. He had everything his family wanted for him, but all he could think about was what he'd lost. Benjamin's footsteps echoed through the quiet night as he left the cafe. The cold air bit at his skin, but the chill within him went deeper. He stuffed his hands into his coat pockets and let his gaze drift to the skyline, where the city's lights blinked like distant stars. But nothing shone bright enough to cut through the darkness that coiled in his chest. She's really gone. It was a thought that gnawed at him relentlessly. The cafe, once a haven of warmth and simple happiness, was now just another reminder of what he'd let slip away. He'd made his choice. He had prioritized the legacy his father so desperately guarded over the one thing that made him feel alive. He took a cab back to his penthouse. The ride passing in a blur of lights and shadows. The driver didn't speak, which suited Benjamin just fine. Words seemed pointless now. He stared out the window, memories bubbling up like ghosts. Megan's laughter, her eyes full of hope, the way her hand felt in his. It was all gone because he'd walked away. The elevator ride to his penthouse felt longer than usual. The door opened to his pristine, tastefully decorated home. Everything was exactly as it should be. And yet, the silence was deafening. He shrugged off his coat, letting it fall onto the sofa. The city stretched out beneath his floor-to-ceiling windows. But the view that once made him feel powerful now felt like a cage. His phone buzzed in his pocket, pulling him from his thoughts. He pulled it out and saw his father's name on the screen. His jaw tightened, and for a moment, he considered ignoring it. But the old reflex took over, the one drilled into him since childhood. "Hello, Benjamin." His father's voice was calm, measured. "I need you to confirm the meeting with the Vanderharts for next week. We can't afford any distractions." Benjamin's grip on the phone tightened. "I understand." "Good. We're counting on you, son. Remember, family first. Legacy above all." The call ended before Benjamin could respond. He stared at the screen, the words family first ringing in his ears with cruel irony. Family. The concept felt foreign to him now. He was 32 years old, and all he had was an empire he didn't want, and an empty penthouse. He walked over to the bar cart, pouring himself a glass of whiskey. The amber liquid shimmered under the soft lighting. He took a sip, the burn in his throat a welcome distraction. He sank into the leather armchair, staring at the untouched glass coffee table in front of him. In its reflection, he saw the man he had become, cold, distant, successful by all outward measures, but broken on the inside. He thought of that night in Central Park again. The words he'd said to Megan echoed back to him, each one like a shard of glass. "I need someone who can give me a family." He had watched the light fade from her eyes. The tears she tried to blink away had threatened to undo him, but he'd steeled himself, reminding himself that this was necessary. His father's voice had been in his head, drilling into him the importance of heirs, of keeping the Harrison name strong. Legacy above all, his father always said. And Benjamin, the dutiful son, had listened when Megan had whispered, "I thought love was enough." Something inside him had cracked, but he'd ignored it, afraid that if he let himself feel, he'd shatter completely. He drained the whiskey, the warmth doing little to soothe the ache. He knew what he'd done to Megan was unforgivable. She had been everything he wasn't, kind, genuine, unafraid to love, and he'd destroyed that love for the sake of a legacy that felt more like a curse than a blessing. A sudden wave of anger surged through him, directed at himself, at his father, at the expectations that had crushed his happiness. He slammed the glass onto the table, the sound sharp and final. Enough. He had been living his life on autopilot, chasing someone else's vision of success. But at what cost? He had traded warmth for cold ambition, joy for sterile obligation. And now, all he had was an emptiness that no amount of mergers or accolades could fill. He stood abruptly, the decision crystallizing in his mind. He couldn't change the past, but he could stop being a slave to it. He grabbed his coat, determination hardening his features. He needed to step away from the shadow of the Harrison legacy, even if just for a moment. He needed to breathe. The city waited outside, sprawling and alive. Maybe somewhere in that vast expanse, he could find a way to make things right. He didn't know where he was going. But staying in this gilded cage was no longer an option. The cold air slapped him as he stepped onto the sidewalk. But this time, he welcomed it. He shoved his hands into his pockets and started walking, each step feeling lighter than the last. For the first time in years, he felt like he was moving toward something real. Megan stared out the window of the train as it rumbled away from New York City. The skyline she once dreamed of was growing smaller, fading into a blur of gray and glass. Her fingers curled tightly around the strap of her worn leather bag, the contents of her entire life packed inside. The hum of the train wheels on the tracks echoed the hollow ache in her chest. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass, eyes red and puffy, lips pressed together in a tight line. She took a shaky breath and wiped at her cheeks, determined not to let the tears fall again. She'd cried enough already. The memory of Benjamin's words still burned in her mind, each one like a knife twisting deeper into her heart. "I need someone who can give me a family." He had said it so matter-of-factly, as if she were just a business deal gone wrong, a faulty investment to be discarded. She'd thought they had something real, something untouchable. But she was wrong. Love, it turned out, wasn't enough to stand against a legacy built on steel and cold ambition. The train jostled, and she gripped the edge of her seat to steady herself. She was heading to Chicago, a city she barely knew, with no plan, other than to escape the pain that clung to every corner of New York. Her friend Claire had promised to help her get settled, even found her a job cleaning rooms at a small hotel. It wasn't much, but it was a start, a chance to rebuild. She closed her eyes and leaned her forehead against the window, the cold glass a small relief against her burning skin. Images of Benjamin flashed through her mind, the way he used to smile when she made him laugh, the way his eyes softened when he looked at her. Those memories used to bring comfort now. They felt like cruel reminders of everything she'd lost. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She ignored it. She had told Claire she'd call when she arrived. But right now, the thought of talking to anyone was overwhelming. She needed to be alone with her grief, to let it wash over her so she could begin the long, painful process of moving on. A soft sob escaped her lips before she could stop it. She clamped a hand over her mouth, but the tears came anyway, hot and relentless. The few passengers nearby averted their eyes, giving her the space to unravel. She welcomed the anonymity, the freedom to fall apart without judgment. How did it come to this? She wondered. How had something so beautiful turned into such agony? The train pulled into another station, and Megan barely registered the shuffle of passengers getting on and off. Her world felt like it was collapsing in on itself, shrinking until all that was left was the raw, aching hole where her heart used to be. She thought back to the nights she'd spent in Benjamin's arms, when the future seemed so full of promise. They had talked about everything: books, dreams, silly childhood memories. He had once told her she made him feel alive, that with her, he could escape the suffocating weight of his world. But in the end, the weight won, and she lost. The train began moving again, and Megan forced herself to breathe, to focus on the rhythm of the wheels beneath her. The pain wasn't going to vanish overnight, but she had to believe it would lessen. She had to believe that there was still something waiting for her out there, a life beyond this heartbreak. The landscape outside the window shifted from urban sprawl to open fields, the horizon wide and endless. It was strange, she thought, how the world kept moving forward even when her own felt like it had stopped. She remembered the look in Benjamin's eyes when he walked away, hard, determined, but with a flicker of something else, regret, maybe, or fear. But whatever it was, it hadn't been enough to make him stay, and now it was too late. The train conductor's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing the approach to Chicago. Megan straightened, wiping her cheeks with the back of her hand. She dug her phone out of her pocket and saw Claire's message waiting. "I'll be at the station to pick you up. We'll get through this together." Megan's throat tightened. The kindness in those words, the promise of friendship, was a lifeline she desperately needed. She took a deep breath and typed back, "See you soon." As the train slowed, she gathered her bag and stood, her legs shaky but determined. The platform was crowded, but she spotted Claire immediately. A petite woman with bright red hair and a smile that was equal parts comfort and determination. Megan stepped off the train, and Claire pulled her into a hug, holding her tight. "You're going to be okay," Claire whispered. "I promise." Megan closed her eyes, letting those words seep into the cracks of her broken heart. She didn't feel okay yet, but maybe, just maybe, she would be. And for now, that was enough. The cold wind of Chicago nipped at Megan's cheeks as she stepped off the platform with Claire by her side. The city's skyline loomed in the distance, a jagged silhouette against the gray winter sky. This wasn't the fresh start she had imagined for herself, but it was the one she had. "Welcome to Chicago," Claire said with a small smile, her bright red hair fluttering in the breeze. "It's not glamorous, but it's home." Megan forced a smile in return, though it felt fragile. Home sounds good right now. They made their way to Claire's aging sedan parked on the curb. The inside smelled of peppermint and coffee, a small comfort against the biting chill. Claire turned on the heater, and warm air sputtered out as the car jolted into traffic. "Work starts tomorrow," Claire said, glancing at Megan. "Are you sure you're ready?" "I need to be," Megan replied, staring out the window as the city passed by. Streets filled with hurried pedestrians, steam rising from grates, the distant wail of a siren, all of it foreign and overwhelming. But she welcomed the distraction. Anything was better than the emptiness that threatened to consume her if she stayed still for too long. "You'll like the hotel," Claire continued. "It's small, nothing fancy, but the people are nice, and the pay's steady. That's all I need," Megan said softly. Stability, routine, something to keep her mind and hands busy so she wouldn't drown in her thoughts. Claire's apartment was a modest 2-bedroom in a brick building with ivy creeping up the walls. It was cozy, with mismatched furniture and the scent of cinnamon lingering in the air. Megan dropped her bag by the door, her shoulders sagging under the weight of exhaustion. "You can take the spare room," Claire said, pointing to a door at the end of the hallway. "It's small, but it's yours for as long as you need." "Thank you, Claire, for everything." Claire waved a dismissive hand. "You do the same for me. Besides, a little company won't hurt. It gets quiet here." Megan nodded, grateful beyond words. She retreated to the small room, taking in the twin bed covered with a faded quilt, a tiny desk by the window, and a creaky old dresser. It wasn't much, but it was enough. She set her bag on the bed and sat beside it, her fingers trembling slightly. The silence settled around her like a blanket, and for a moment, the weight of everything threatened to crush her. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the memories that clawed at the edges of her mind. Benjamin's cold expression, the way his voice had turned distant, the finality of his words. But then she took a deep breath, letting the air fill her lungs and steady her thoughts. This was a new beginning. It had to be. The next morning, Megan stood in front of the mirror, smoothing down her simple black uniform. Her eyes looked tired, shadows bruising the skin beneath them, but there was a determination in her gaze that hadn't been there before. "You've got this," she whispered to herself. Claire dropped her off at the hotel, a 4-story brick building tucked between a bakery and a hardware store. It was a far cry from the gleaming skyscrapers of New York, but it had charm. The sign above the entrance read, "The Clover Inn," in faded gold lettering. Inside, the scent of fresh-baked pastries from the bakery next door mingled with the faint tang of lemon cleaner. The front desk was manned by a young woman with dark curls and a bright smile. "You must be Megan," she said, extending a hand. "I'm Lisa. Welcome to the Clover Inn." "Thank you," Megan replied, shaking her hand. The warmth in Lisa's voice settled some of the nerves fluttering in her stomach. Lisa handed her a stack of towels and cleaning supplies. "Your first rooms are on the 2nd floor. It's pretty quiet today, so take your time." Megan nodded and headed for the stairs, her feet feeling heavy with the weight of starting over. Each step felt like she was climbing away from the ruins of her old life, but with every door she opened, every bed she made, and every surface she wiped clean, she felt a little more grounded. The work was familiar, almost comforting. The rhythm of it soothed her mind, the way the sheets snapped as she spread them over the mattress, the scent of soap and fabric softener, the shine of a freshly cleaned mirror. She focused on the tasks at hand, losing herself in the simplicity of the routine. By the time she finished her last room, The sun was beginning to dip behind the buildings outside the window. Her muscles ached, but it was a good ache, a reminder that she was still here, still moving forward. She glanced out the window at the bustling street below. People hurried by, wrapped in coats and scarves, their lives continuing in 1,000 different directions. For the first time in weeks, Megan felt like she was part of that world again, a tiny piece in a much larger puzzle. She gathered her supplies and headed back downstairs, where Lisa greeted her with a smile. "How was your first day?" "Good," Megan said, surprised to find that she meant it. "It felt good. Glad to hear it. You're doing great already." Megan smiled, a small, genuine smile that felt like the first crack of sunlight through a storm cloud. Maybe this new beginning wasn't going to be easy, but for the first time in a long while, it felt possible. The morning sun filtered through the curtains of Claire's living room, casting warm stripes across the floor. Megan sipped a cup of coffee at the small kitchen table, the heat soothing her hands. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the faint scent of cinnamon lingering from Claire's baking spree the night before. She closed her eyes, savoring the quiet moment. It had been a week since she started at the Clover Inn, and for the first time in a long while, a sense of stability began to take root. The routine was steady, predictable, exactly what her heart needed to mend, piece by piece. Claire walked in, her red hair tousled, yawning as she poured herself a cup. "You're up early," Megan shrugged, offering a small smile. Force of habit. Claire leaned against the counter, studying her friend. "You seem better, a little more present." "I'm trying," Megan said softly. "One day at a time," Claire nodded. "That's all you can do. And remember, you don't have to do it alone." The warmth in Claire's voice settled into Megan's chest, a reminder that she was no longer isolated. This new chapter was still raw, but it wasn't empty. There were people who cared, who wanted to help her rebuild. And maybe, just maybe, she was ready to let them. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Claire raised an eyebrow. "Expecting anyone?" "No," Megan replied, curiosity stirring. Claire opened the door, revealing a tall man in scrubs, a stethoscope dangling around his neck. He had dark hair, neatly trimmed, and kind blue eyes that sparkled when he smiled. "Hey, Claire," he said. "Hope I'm not too early." "Anthony?" Claire grinned. "Come in." Megan's eyes widened as Anthony Reed stepped inside, his presence immediately filling the small apartment with warmth. He was a familiar face, one she'd seen several times at the inn over the past week. He often passed through the lobby on his way to the nearby clinic, always offering a polite nod or a friendly smile. "This is Megan," Claire introduced, gesturing to her. "She's the friend I told you about." Anthony turned to Megan, his smile softening. "Nice to finally meet you officially. I've seen you around the inn. How are you settling in?" "Good," Megan replied, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks. "It's peaceful. I'm glad to hear that," he said, his eyes holding hers just a second longer than necessary. There was no pity in his gaze, no probing curiosity, just genuine kindness. It was disarming. "Anthony's the one who volunteers at the clinic," Claire added. "He's been helping out with some of the local kids." Anthony shrugged modestly. "It's nothing big, just trying to do my part." Claire winked at Megan. "He's being humble, he's a saint." "Hardly," Anthony chuckled. "Anyway, Claire, you promised me some of your famous cinnamon rolls. I'm about to head to the clinic, and I could use some fuel." "Right!" Claire dashed into the kitchen, leaving Anthony and Megan standing in an awkward silence. Anthony cleared his throat, rocking back on his heels. "So, you've been here a week? How are you liking Chicago?" "It's different," Megan admitted, "but it's starting to feel more manageable." "That's good. Change can be hard, but it gets easier." His eyes softened. "Especially with good people around." Megan nodded, a lump forming in her throat. "Yeah, I'm learning that." Claire returned with a paper bag full of cinnamon rolls. "Here you go, Dr. Reed, breakfast of champions." Anthony took the bag, his smile grateful. "Thanks, Claire. You're a lifesaver." He glanced at Megan. "It was nice meeting you, Megan. I'm sure I'll see you around." "Yeah," Megan replied, her smile hesitant but real. "See you around." He waved and left, the door closing softly behind him. Megan watched the door for a moment longer, something warm lingering in her chest. Claire nudged her shoulder. "He's a good one, you know." Megan let out a shaky breath. "I'm not ready for anything like that." "I didn't say you were," Claire replied gently. "But it's okay to let people in, even just a little." Megan nodded, her mind swirling. She wasn't ready to think about what came next, but she couldn't deny that Anthony's kindness had touched something deep inside her, a part of her she thought was broken beyond repair. That afternoon, Megan was finishing up a room at the inn when she heard children's laughter echo from the lobby. She peeked out the door and saw Anthony kneeling next to a pair of twin boys, no older than 5. They had matching brown curls and wide, curious eyes. "Connor, Owen," Anthony said with a grin. "Are you two ready to help me at the clinic today?" "Yes," they shouted in unison, giggling as they each grabbed one of his hands. Megan's heart clenched unexpectedly. Something about the way the boys looked at Anthony, with pure trust and joy, tugged at memories she'd buried deep, memories of hopes she used to have, dreams she thought were gone forever. Anthony caught her eye and smiled, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Megan smiled back, a flicker of hope blooming in her chest. Maybe healing wasn't about forgetting the past. Maybe it was about finding new ways to embrace the future. And maybe, just maybe, she was ready to try. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the windows of the Clover Inn as Megan folded the last set of towels in room 208. The crisp white fabric warmed her hands, a comforting reminder of the small routine she'd come to rely on. She stacked the towels neatly, straightened the pillows, and gave the room a final glance. Perfect, orderly, predictable. She closed the door behind her, letting out a sigh of contentment. The weight that had settled on her shoulders in New York felt a little lighter with each passing day. This new life was far from glamorous, but it was steady, and for now, steady was enough. As she walked down the hallway, the sound of children's laughter filtered up from the lobby. A smile tugged at her lips before she even realized it. She'd grown used to hearing Connor and Owen's giggles whenever Anthony brought them to the clinic nearby. The sound was pure, unfiltered joy, something that had felt foreign to her for a long time. She made her way to the lobby, where Anthony was kneeling in front of the twins, helping them tie their sneakers. His voice was soft, patient, as he gave them instructions. The boys hung on his every word, their brown curls bouncing as they nodded enthusiastically. "There you go, all set," Anthony said, ruffling Owen's hair. "Ready to head out?" "Yeah," the boys shouted in unison. Anthony straightened, his gaze landing on Megan. His smile, warm and genuine, made her heart stutter. "Hey, Megan." "Hey," she replied, her voice softer than she intended. "Headed to the clinic." "Yeah, these two are my helpers today," he said, chuckling as Connor flexed his tiny arms in a show of strength. "We're gonna be doctors," Connor announced proudly. "Doctors who get stickers and lollipops," Owen added, grinning. Megan laughed, the sound feeling strange and wonderful in her chest. "Sounds like a good deal to me." Anthony's eyes crinkled at the corners, the way they always did when he smiled. "You should come with us sometime. See these little guys in action." Her smile faltered slightly. The invitation was casual, but it stirred something deep inside her, something she wasn't sure she was ready to face. "I don't know," she began, her voice trailing off. Anthony studied her for a moment, his gaze thoughtful. "No pressure, just think about it." He turned back to the boys. "All right, team, let's roll." The twins waved at Megan, their faces beaming. "Bye, Megan. Bye, guys," she said, her heart aching with an emotion she couldn't quite name. She watched them leave, the lobby door swinging shut behind them. The silence that followed felt different now, emptier. She wrapped her arms around herself, staring at the door long after they were gone. That evening, Megan sat on the small balcony of Claire's apartment, the city's lights twinkling in the distance. The chill in the air was sharp, but she barely felt it. Her mind was a whirlwind, memories and emotions tangled together in a knot she couldn't unravel. She thought of Benjamin, of the dreams they once shared, dreams of a future that had shattered into 1,000 pieces. She had wanted a family, a home filled with love and laughter. But when that dream was ripped away, she'd convinced herself she didn't need it anymore. Now, with Anthony and the twins, those long-buried dreams stirred again, fragile but persistent. Claire's voice interrupted her thoughts. "Penny for your thoughts." Megan turned, offering a small smile as Claire joined her, wrapped in a thick blanket. "I'm not sure they're worth that much." Claire leaned back in her chair, eyes thoughtful. "It's about Anthony, isn't it?" Megan sighed. "It's not just him. It's everything. Seeing him with those boys, hearing their laughter. It makes me wonder if I've been lying to myself." "About what?" "About what I want," Megan said, her voice barely a whisper. "I thought I was done with the idea of family, of being a mother. After everything that happened with Benjamin, I told myself it was better not to want those things." Claire nodded slowly. "And now I'm not so sure," Megan admitted, her eyes glistening. "I'm scared, Claire. Scared of wanting it again, of getting hurt." Claire reached over, squeezing her hand. "You're stronger than you think, Meg. You survived the worst heartbreak, and you're still here. That says a lot." Megan took a shaky breath, her fingers tightening around Claire's. "But what if I can't do it? What if I get hurt again?" Claire smiled gently. "Or what if you find something beautiful? What if you get a second chance at happiness?" The words settled into Megan's heart, a seed of hope taking root. Maybe she was stronger than she realized. Maybe the dreams she thought were lost forever were still within reach. She looked out at the city, the lights flickering like tiny beacons of possibility. "I think it's time to stop being scared," she whispered. Claire squeezed her hand one last time. "Then go after what you want, Meg. Your heart knows the way." The next morning, Megan stood outside the clinic, her heart pounding. Through the window, she saw Anthony helping Connor and Owen with a stack of coloring books. The sight made her chest tighten with warmth. She took a deep breath and stepped inside. The bell above the door chimed softly. Anthony looked up, surprise and joy lighting his face. "Megan?" he said, his smile widening. "You came," she smiled back, her heart lighter than it had been in years. "Yeah, I did." And for the first time, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the windows of the Clover Inn as Megan folded the last set of towels in room 208. The crisp white fabric warmed her hands, a comforting reminder of the small routine she'd come to rely on. She stacked the towels neatly, straightened the pillows, and gave the room a final glance. Perfect, orderly, predictable. She closed the door behind her, letting out a sigh of contentment. The weight that had settled on her shoulders in New York felt a little lighter with each passing day. This new life was far from glamorous, but it was steady, and for now, steady was enough. As she walked down the hallway, the sound of children's laughter filtered up from the lobby. A smile tugged at her lips before she even realized it. She'd grown used to hearing Connor and Owen's giggles whenever Anthony brought them to the clinic nearby. The sound was pure, unfiltered joy, something that had felt foreign to her for a long time. She made her way to the lobby, where Anthony was kneeling in front of the twins, helping them tie their sneakers. His voice was soft, patient, as he gave them instructions. The boys hung on his every word, their brown curls bouncing as they nodded enthusiastically. "There you go, all set," Anthony said, ruffling Owen's hair. "Ready to head out." "Yeah," the boys shouted in unison. Anthony straightened, his gaze landing on Megan. His smile, warm and genuine, made her heart stutter. "Hey, Megan." "Hey," she replied, her voice softer than she intended. "Headed to the clinic." "Yeah, these two are my helpers today," he said, chuckling as Connor flexed his tiny arms in a show of strength. "We're gonna be doctors," Connor announced proudly. "Doctors who get stickers and lollipops," Owen added, grinning. Megan laughed, the sound feeling strange and wonderful in her chest. "Sounds like a good deal to me." Anthony's eyes crinkled at the corners, the way they always did when he smiled. "You should come with us sometime. See these little guys in action." Her smile faltered slightly. The invitation was casual, but it stirred something deep inside her, something she wasn't sure she was ready to face. "I don't know," she began, her voice trailing off. Anthony studied her for a moment, his gaze thoughtful. "No pressure, just think about it." He turned back to the boys. "All right, team, let's roll." The twins waved at Megan, their faces beaming. "Bye, Megan. Bye, guys," she said, her heart aching with an emotion she couldn't quite name. She watched them leave, the lobby door swinging shut behind them. The silence that followed felt different now, emptier. She wrapped her arms around herself, staring at the door long after they were gone. That evening, Megan sat on the small balcony of Claire's apartment, the city's lights twinkling in the distance. The chill in the air was sharp, but she barely felt it. Her mind was a whirlwind, memories and emotions tangled together in a knot she couldn't unravel. She thought of Benjamin, of the dreams they once shared, dreams of a future that had shattered into 1,000 pieces. She had wanted a family, a home filled with love and laughter. But when that dream was ripped away, she'd convinced herself she didn't need it anymore. Now, with Anthony and the twins, those long-buried dreams stirred again, fragile but persistent. Claire's voice interrupted her thoughts. "Penny for your thoughts." Megan turned, offering a small smile as Claire joined her, wrapped in a thick blanket. "I'm not sure they're worth that much." Claire leaned back in her chair, eyes thoughtful. "It's about Anthony, isn't it?" Megan sighed. "It's not just him. It's everything. Seeing him with those boys, hearing their laughter. It makes me wonder if I've been lying to myself." "About what?" "About what I want," Megan said, her voice barely a whisper. "I thought I was done with the idea of family, of being a mother. After everything that happened with Benjamin, I told myself it was better not to want those things." Claire nodded slowly. "And now I'm not so sure," Megan admitted, her eyes glistening. "I'm scared, Claire. Scared of wanting it again, of getting hurt." Claire reached over, squeezing her hand. "You're stronger than you think, Meg. You survived the worst heartbreak, and you're still here. That says a lot." Megan took a shaky breath, her fingers tightening around Claire's. "But what if I can't do it? What if I get hurt again?" Claire smiled gently. "Or what if you find something beautiful? What if you get a second chance at happiness?" The words settled into Megan's heart, a seed of hope taking root. Maybe she was stronger than she realized. Maybe the dreams she thought were lost forever were still within reach. She looked out at the city, the lights flickering like tiny beacons of possibility. "I think it's time to stop being scared," she whispered. Claire squeezed her hand one last time. "Then go after what you want, Meg. Your heart knows the way." The next morning, Megan stood outside the clinic, her heart pounding. Through the window, she saw Anthony helping Connor and Owen with a stack of coloring books. The sight made her chest tighten with warmth. She took a deep breath and stepped inside. The bell above the door chimed softly. Anthony looked up, surprise and joy lighting his face. "Megan?" he said, his smile widening. "You came." She smiled back, her heart lighter than it had been in years. "Yeah, I did." And for the first time, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The clinic was alive with activity. The scent of antiseptic mingled with the faint aroma of crayons and bubblegum. Connor and Owen were huddled over a table in the corner, furiously scribbling on coloring books, their laughter bubbling up like a bright melody. Anthony glanced at Megan, his eyes soft with warmth. "I'm glad you came," he said, his voice gentle. "I wasn't sure I would," she admitted, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "But I needed to see this. See you with them." His smile was understanding. "No pressure, Megan. Just take things at your own pace." She nodded, grateful for his patience. The past still felt like a shadow lurking behind her. But standing here, in this small, bustling clinic, she felt something different, something like hope. "Megan," Connor's voice rang out as he waved her over. "Look what I drew." She walked to the table, her heart clenching at the sight of his big, hopeful eyes. He held up a crayon drawing of 3 stick figures, holding hands under a bright yellow sun. One figure was clearly Anthony, with a stethoscope drawn around his neck. The other 2 were the twins, labeled Connor and Owen in clumsy handwriting. "And who's this one?" Megan asked, pointing to the 3rd figure, who had long brown hair. Connor's grin widened. "That's you. You're part of the team now." Megan's breath caught, a lump forming in her throat. She looked at the drawing, the simplicity of it almost undoing her. In this child's eyes, she was already someone who belonged. Tears prickled behind her eyes, but she blinked them away, unwilling to let the moment slip into sadness. "I love it," she whispered. Thank you, Connor. He beamed and went back to his coloring. Satisfied. Megan stood up, her gaze meeting Anthony's across the room. There was no need for words. The connection between them was palpable. The rest of the afternoon flew by. Megan helped organize supplies while Anthony saw his patients, the twins trailing behind him like enthusiastic little shadows. Occasionally, Owen would pop into the storage room where Megan was working, his face bright with curiosity. "Do you like it here?" he asked, his eyes wide and earnest. "I do," Megan replied with a smile. "It feels nice." Owen nodded, as if satisfied with her answer. "Good. I like when you're here." Her heart melted a little more. As the day wound down, Megan found herself wiping down the counters in the exam room, the quiet hum of the clinic settling into a gentle rhythm. The door creaked open behind her, and she turned to find Anthony leaning against the frame, his arms crossed and a soft smile on his lips. "Thank you for helping today," he said. "The boys loved having you around, and so did I." Megan felt the warmth rise to her cheeks. "It felt good to be here. I didn't realize how much I missed. Well, this. Being part of something." Anthony stepped closer, his gaze steady. "You are part of something, Megan. And not just here at the clinic. You've built a new life, even when it felt impossible." She swallowed hard, his words touching the parts of her heart she thought were too broken to heal. "I didn't think I could." "You're stronger than you know," he said, his voice low and sincere. "And whatever happens next, you don't have to do it alone." The air between them was charged with unspoken possibilities. Megan's chest tightened with a mix of fear and longing. She had been hurt so deeply. The scars still raw, but the idea of shutting herself off from the world forever felt just as painful. Anthony's fingers brushed her hand, the touch gentle and reassuring. "It's okay to take a chance," he whispered. Her eyes met his, searching for reassurance. "What if I fall apart again?" He smiled softly. "Then I'll be here to help you put the pieces back together." A tear slipped down her cheek. But this time, it wasn't out of sorrow. It was out of the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, she could trust again. That maybe she deserved to be happy, even after everything. She took a shaky breath and nodded. "Okay." Anthony's smile widened, a lightness in his eyes that made her heart flutter. He leaned in, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. A promise, not a demand. "Let's take it one step at a time," he murmured. "One step at a time," she repeated, the words a lifeline, as they walked out of the clinic together. The twins raced ahead, their laughter echoing in the crisp evening air. Megan watched them, her heart swelling with an unfamiliar joy. The city lights shimmered around them, but for the first time, they didn't feel cold or distant. They felt like beacons, lighting a path she was finally ready to walk. Anthony's hand found hers, his fingers warm and steady. She squeezed back, a quiet acknowledgement that she was ready to try. Maybe love wasn't about perfection or certainty. Maybe it was about choosing to believe, even when the path ahead was uncertain. She looked at Anthony, his eyes reflecting the same hope she felt blooming inside her. For the first time in a long while, Megan didn't feel lost. She felt found. The warmth of Anthony's hand lingered long after Megan said goodnight and climbed the steps to Claire's apartment. Her heart felt light, almost buoyant, a feeling she hadn't experienced in what felt like forever. She paused on the threshold, took a deep breath of the crisp night air, and allowed herself a small smile. For the first time, hope didn't seem like a distant, unattainable thing. Claire was curled up on the couch when Megan walked in, a bowl of popcorn on her lap and an old sitcom playing on the TV. She looked up with a grin. "You look happy." Megan blushed, unable to suppress the smile spreading across her face. I think I am." Claire's grin widened. "I knew it, you and Dr. Handsome have a thing going on." "It's not a thing," Megan insisted, though the flutter in her chest told a different story. "We're just taking things one step at a time." "That's a good thing," Claire said, popping a piece of popcorn into her mouth. "Sometimes the best things come when you're not rushing." Megan nodded, a quiet sense of peace settling over her. "I think you're right." She wandered into her room, changed into her pajamas, and slipped into bed. As she lay there, staring at the ceiling, thoughts of Anthony and the twins swirled through her mind. Their laughter, Anthony's gentle smile, the way he looked at her with quiet understanding. It all felt so real, so possible. She closed her eyes, letting herself drift into sleep with a soft, hopeful sigh. The next morning, Megan arrived at the Clover Inn with a spring in her step. The sun was shining, and the city seemed to hum with a renewed energy. She clocked in, grabbed her cleaning supplies, and got to work, humming softly to herself as she made her way through the second-floor rooms. By the time she reached room 303, she was lost in thought, replaying the moments she'd shared with Anthony. A smile tugged at her lips as she knocked lightly on the door, announcing her presence. Housekeeping. No response. She slid the key card into the lock and pushed the door open. The room was bathed in soft morning light, the curtains drawn back to reveal a stunning view of the Chicago skyline. She stepped inside, her mind still drifting in the warmth of her thoughts. Then she froze. A man stood by the window, his back to her, a tailored suit fitting his broad shoulders perfectly. His hands were shoved into his pockets, his posture rigid. The familiar scent of expensive cologne drifted toward her, and a chill swept through her body. He turned around slowly, and Megan's heart stopped. Benjamin. Her breath caught in her throat, a wave of shock and confusion crashing over her. She gripped the handle of her cleaning cart to steady herself, her knees threatening to buckle. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them was heavy, thick with memories and unsaid words. His blue eyes, once so familiar, held a mixture of surprise and something else, something she couldn't quite name. "Megan," he said finally, his voice low and rough. He took a hesitant step forward. "I didn't expect to see you here." Her heart pounded painfully in her chest. The rush of emotions almost too much to bear. Anger, hurt, disbelief, all tangled together in a knot that tightened with every beat. "What are you doing here?" she managed to whisper, her voice trembling. Benjamin's jaw clenched. He looked down for a moment, as if gathering his thoughts, before meeting her eyes again. "Business? A meeting with a potential partner? I didn't know you were in Chicago." She swallowed hard, her fingers gripping the cart tighter. "A lot's changed." He nodded, his gaze flicking over her face, as if trying to read the story of the past months in her expression. "You look different." Her lips tightened. "I am different." Silence stretched between them, the distance more than just physical. Megan's mind raced. Seeing him here, now, felt like a cruel trick of fate, a reminder of a life she'd fought so hard to leave behind. Benjamin started, then stopped, his eyes clouding with something that looked like regret. "I didn't expect to see you, but I'm glad I did." Her laugh was bitter and quiet. "Glad? Why? Because I need to say that I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "I know it doesn't change anything, but I am. I was wrong, Megan, about everything." His words pierced her, reopening wounds she thought were healing. She shook her head, tears burning at the edges of her vision. "It's too late for apologies, Benjamin. I've moved on." He flinched, his eyes searching hers for a crack in the wall she'd built. "Moved on?" he asked softly. "To someone else?" Her jaw tightened, and she looked away, refusing to let him see the truth etched in her face. "That's none of your business." He took a step back, pain flickering across his features. "I guess it isn't." A long silence followed, heavy with the weight of everything they'd left unsaid. Megan's hands shook as she gripped the cart, willing herself to stay strong. "I should go," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, the fight gone from his eyes. "Take care, Megan." She turned and walked out of the room, her heart hammering in her chest. The door clicked shut behind her, and she leaned against the wall, gasping for breath. Tears welled up, but she blinked them away. Swallowing the lump in her throat, she had made her choice, and she wouldn't let the past pull her back. But as she stood there, the echoes of his words lingered, refusing to fade. Megan's hands shook as she pushed the cleaning cart down the hallway, her vision blurred by unshed tears. The soft hum of the hotel faded into white noise. Her heart was racing, her chest tight with emotions she thought she'd buried forever. Benjamin. The name echoed in her mind, a ghost she never wanted to face again. Seeing him, hearing his voice, had shattered the fragile peace she'd spent months building. She turned a corner, forcing deep breaths, trying to steady herself, but the ache in her chest refused to go away. She slipped into the employee break room and sank into a chair, pressing her palms to her eyes. The door creaked open, and Claire's voice broke through the haze. "Megan." Claire's brow furrowed with concern. "What happened? You look like you've seen a ghost." Megan let out a shaky breath and lowered her hands. "I think I just did." Claire pulled out a chair and sat beside her. "What do you mean? Benjamin? He's here? At the hotel?" The words tasted bitter on her tongue. Claire's eyes widened. "Wait, Benjamin. The guy who—" "Yes." Megan cut her off, the rawness of the memory making her stomach twist. "He's here for some business meeting. I walked into his room and there he was." "Oh, Meg." Claire's voice softened, her hand reaching out to squeeze Megan's. "I'm so sorry." Megan swallowed hard, tears threatening to spill. "I thought I was done with him. I thought I'd moved on, but seeing him, it felt like everything came rushing back. The hurt, the rejection, all of it." Claire's grip tightened. "You don't owe him anything. Not your time, not your forgiveness. You've come so far. Don't let him drag you back to that pain." Megan nodded, her throat tight. "I know, but part of me still wonders. Why? Why did he come back now? Why did fate decide to throw him in my path again?" Claire hesitated, her eyes thoughtful. "Sometimes, the past finds a way to test us, to see if we're really ready to let go." Megan closed her eyes, her mind swirling with memories of late nights in New York, stolen moments of laughter and warmth that had all turned to ash. She remembered the way he'd looked at her this morning, regret and pain etched on his face. "Why should I care?" she thought bitterly. "He's the one who walked away." The break room door swung open again, and Lisa popped her head in. "Hey, Megan, there's someone at the front desk asking for you." Megan's heart stopped. "Who is it?" Lisa shrugged. "Didn't say just asked for you by name." Claire's eyes narrowed. "You don't have to go if you're not ready." But something inside Megan stirred. A need for closure, maybe. Or just the desire to confront the shadows that still haunted her. She took a deep breath and stood up. "I need to face this." Claire nodded, her eyes full of support. "I'm here if you need me." Megan forced a small smile. "Thank you." The walk to the front desk felt like trudging through wet sand. Every step weighed her down. She saw him before he saw her. Benjamin, standing by the large window, his hands tucked in his pockets, his gaze distant. He looked different, older somehow. The sharp edges of his confidence softened by something she couldn't quite place. When he turned and met her eyes, a flicker of vulnerability crossed his face. "Megan," he said, his voice low. She stopped a few feet away, arms crossed over her chest, every muscle tight. "What do you want, Benjamin?" He sighed, his shoulders sagging slightly. I needed to see you, to explain." "Explain," she repeated, bitterness creeping into her tone. "You mean explain why you threw me away like I didn't matter? Why you chose your legacy over me?" His eyes closed briefly, pain flashing across his features. "I made a mistake. The worst mistake of my life." She shook her head, anger bubbling up. "You don't get to say that now. Not after everything I went through." "I know," he said, his voice breaking. "But I can't change the past. I can only tell you the truth." Her breath hitched. "What truth?" He looked away, his jaw tight. "I was scared, Megan. Scared of disappointing my family, of losing everything I'd worked for. I thought I was doing the right thing. But all I did was destroy the one thing that mattered." A tear slipped down her cheek, and she wiped it away angrily. "You destroyed me, Benjamin. You left me to pick up the pieces of a life I thought we were building together." He stepped closer, desperation in his eyes. "I know, and I hate myself for it. But seeing you here now, it's like fate is giving me a second chance to make things right." She took a step back, her heart pounding. "I don't believe in second chances, not when it comes to you." Silence stretched between them, the weight of his regret clashing with her pain. She turned away, tears blinding her. "Goodbye, Benjamin." He didn't try to stop her this time. As she walked away, her heart felt like it was shattering all over again. But this time, she knew she could survive it. She had to. The cold air bit at Megan's cheeks as she stepped outside the Clover Inn. She drew in a deep breath, letting it fill her lungs, trying to steady her racing heart. Her feet carried her away from the hotel on autopilot, each step echoing with the turmoil inside her. Why now? She thought bitterly. Why did he have to come back and rip open old wounds just when I was starting to heal? Her mind replayed Benjamin's words. The regret in his eyes, the cracks in his carefully constructed armor. She dreamed of hearing those words once, of him realizing the magnitude of his mistake. But now, they felt empty, like a hollow echo of something that no longer mattered. The streets of Chicago bustled with life around her. People rushed to and fro, wrapped in coats and scarves, lost in their own worlds. Megan felt like a ghost, drifting through the crowd, unseen and untouched. The ache in her chest pulsed with every heartbeat. She stopped at a small park bench and sank down onto the cold metal, the wind rustling the bare branches of nearby trees. The city noise faded into a dull hum, and all that was left were her thoughts, sharp, relentless, and suffocating. She thought about everything she'd built since leaving New York, the quiet mornings at the inn, the steady rhythm of work, the slow rebuilding of her shattered confidence. She thought about Anthony, his patient smile, his gentle eyes, the way his presence warmed the coldest parts of her heart. And she thought about Connor and Owen, their laughter like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Her hands trembled as she buried her face in them. She had found something here, something real and steady, But now, with Benjamin's return, it felt like she was standing at a crossroads. The path she thought she'd chosen suddenly shrouded in uncertainty. The sound of footsteps drew her attention. She glanced up to see Anthony approaching, his brow furrowed with concern. He was wearing his scrubs beneath his heavy coat, a coffee cup in each hand. His eyes softened when they met hers. "Claire called me," he said quietly, handing her a cup. She was worried. Megan took the cup, the warmth seeping into her fingers. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to worry her." Anthony sat beside her, close enough that his shoulder brushed hers. "You don't have to apologize. What happened?" She took a shaky breath, the words almost too painful to say. "Benjamin's here. He's staying at the hotel." Anthony's jaw tightened, his eyes darkening. "He spoke to you." She nodded. "He says he regrets everything, that he made a mistake." Anthony was silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on the distance. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured, careful. "And what do you think?" Megan's fingers tightened around the cup. "I don't know. I thought I was done with him, with the pain. But seeing him again, it's like the past came back to haunt me." Anthony's eyes softened. "It's okay to feel that way. The past has a way of clinging to us, no matter how hard we try to let it go." Tears welled up in her eyes, blurring the world. "I don't want to go back to that pain, but part of me is afraid I haven't really moved on, that I'm just running away." He reached out, gently covering her hand with his. "You're not running, Megan, you're healing, and healing takes time." His words broke something inside her. The tears spilled over, hot and uncontrollable. Anthony pulled her into a gentle embrace, his arms a safe harbor in the storm. She sobbed quietly into his shoulder, the weight of months of hurt and confusion pouring out of her. After a while, she pulled back, wiping her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Don't be," he said softly. "You're allowed to feel everything. This isn't easy." She nodded, her breath hitching. "I don't know what to do, Anthony. I don't want to lose what I've found here, what I've found with you." His eyes searched hers, his voice steady. "You don't have to make any decisions right now, but whatever happens, know that I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." A fresh wave of emotion surged through her, but this time, it was tempered by gratitude and something deeper, a quiet, resilient hope. "Thank you," she whispered. He smiled, his thumb brushing away a stray tear from her cheek. "One step at a time, remember?" She nodded, taking a shaky breath, one step at a time. They sat together in silence, the cold wind swirling around them. But Megan no longer felt frozen. She was still at the crossroads, but she wasn't standing there alone. Later that evening, back at the inn, Megan passed by the front desk, her eyes drawn to the elevator. The ache in her chest flared again, but this time, it didn't feel so overwhelming. She turned away, heading toward the back exit instead. As she stepped out into the night air, she made a silent promise to herself. She wasn't the same woman Benjamin had left behind, and she wasn't going to let him unravel everything she'd worked so hard to build. The road ahead might be uncertain, but she was ready to walk it. Megan lay awake in the dark, the soft hum of Claire's apartment filling the silence. The faint glow of streetlights leaked through the curtains, casting patterns on the ceiling. She turned over, staring at the shadows dancing across the walls. But sleep remained just out of reach. Her mind was a tangled mess of memories and emotions. Benjamin's return had stirred everything she'd worked so hard to bury. The regret in his eyes, the raw edge in his voice when he apologized. Those things haunted her, even when she didn't want them to. She closed her eyes, but instead of the peaceful darkness she sought, images flickered behind her eyelids. Benjamin's confident smile, the nights they'd spent whispering about dreams and futures, the cold finality in his voice when he told her she wasn't enough. A bitter taste filled her mouth. She clenched the bedsheet tighter. Why did he have to come back now? Just when she was beginning to find happiness, beginning to trust again, he had reappeared like a storm cloud on the horizon. Her thoughts drifted to Anthony, the steady warmth of his presence, the way he held her when she fell apart, how he never pushed her for more than she was ready to give, his patience, his kindness, the quiet strength in his eyes. With him, things felt simple, grounded, real. A sigh escaped her lips. She wanted to move forward, to believe that the future she'd started building in Chicago could be enough. But the past felt like a weight tied to her ankles, threatening to pull her under. She rolled onto her back and stared at the ceiling, her mind a whirl of questions she couldn't answer. Morning came far too soon. The smell of coffee brewing dragged her from her restless thoughts. She shuffled into the kitchen, where Claire was perched on a stool, scrolling through her phone. "Morning," Claire said, looking up. Her eyes searched Megan's face. "You didn't sleep, did you?" Megan shook her head and poured herself a cup of coffee, the warmth seeping into her fingers. "I couldn't stop thinking." Claire set down her phone and leaned forward, her expression serious. "About Benjamin?" "About everything," Megan admitted. "Seeing him brought it all back. The pain, the doubt. I thought I was done with it, but now, I'm not so sure." Claire's eyes softened. "It's okay to be confused, Meg. You went through hell with him. You're allowed to feel whatever you feel." Megan's shoulders sagged. "But I don't want to feel this way. I don't want him to have any power over me." Claire reached out, squeezing her hand. "Then maybe it's time to face it head on. Confront the past so it can't control you anymore." Megan swallowed hard, the lump in her throat growing. "I'm scared, Claire. What if facing it just makes everything worse?" Claire smiled gently. "Or what if it sets you free?" The words settled into Megan's heart, a small spark of courage flickering to life. Maybe Claire was right. Maybe the only way to move forward was to confront what she'd been running from. She took a deep breath and nodded. "I need to talk to him one last time." Later that afternoon, Megan stood in front of room 303 at the Clover Inn, her heart pounding so loudly she could hear it in her ears. The hallway felt too bright, too quiet, the air thick with expectation. She raised her hand to knock, hesitated, then let it fall. Doubt curled in her stomach. What am I doing? But then she thought of Anthony, of Connor and Owen, of the life she was trying to build. She couldn't move forward if she was still tethered to a ghost. She needed to do this for herself, steeling her nerves. She knocked. The door opened, and there he was, Benjamin. His suit jacket was gone, his shirt sleeves rolled up. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept any more than she had. His eyes widened in surprise when he saw her. "Megan," he breathed. "I didn't think... Can we talk?" She interrupted, her voice shaking slightly. "Please." He stepped back, opening the door wider. "Of course." She entered the room, the door closing softly behind her. The space was impersonal, just another high-end hotel room, but it felt suffocating. She turned to face him, her arms wrapped around herself. Benjamin stood a few feet away, his hands in his pockets, uncertainty in his eyes. "I'm glad you came." She took a steadying breath. "I didn't come for you, I came for me. I need to understand why you did what you did. I need to let this go." He nodded, his jaw tight. "I don't know if I can give you a good answer. I was scared, Megan. Scared of losing the life I thought I was supposed to have. My family, my legacy. They were everything I knew, and I let that fear destroy what we had." Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away. "And now I know none of that matters without you," he said softly. "But I realize it's too late." She swallowed hard. the ache in her chest unbearable. "You're right. It is too late." A tear slipped down her cheek. "I loved you, Benjamin, but you broke me, and I can't go back to that." He closed his eyes, his face crumpling with pain. "I understand." She took a shaky breath. "Goodbye, Benjamin." This time, when she turned to leave, she didn't look back. The door clicked shut behind her, and as she walked away, the weight on her shoulders began to lift. The past was finally behind her, and the future was hers to embrace. The cold wind bit at Megan's cheeks as she stepped out of the Clover Inn. The sun was beginning to dip behind the skyline, casting the streets in a warm, golden glow. She paused on the sidewalk, drawing in a deep breath that seemed to fill every corner of her chest. It's over, for the first time since she'd left New York. The weight of the past didn't press down on her shoulders. The conversation with Benjamin had cracked something open inside her, a door she'd kept bolted shut out of fear. But now that door was open, and the air on the other side was fresh and clean. She'd said goodbye, not just to Benjamin, but to the pain, the regret, the doubts. She had faced the storm, and now the skies were finally clearing. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she pulled it out to see a message from Anthony. "Hope you're okay. Let me know if you need anything." Warmth spread through her, soft and steady. She smiled, her fingers hovering over the screen. Then she took a deep breath and typed back, "I'm okay. Can I see you?" The reply came almost instantly. "Of course, come by the clinic, I'll be here." Her heart lifted as she turned toward the clinic, her steps quickening. The wind tugged at her hair, but it felt less like a challenge, and more like an invitation, a reminder that she was alive, that she was moving forward. The bell above the clinic door chimed as Megan stepped inside. The familiar scent of antiseptic and fresh paper filled the air. The small waiting area was empty, the chairs neatly aligned in the back. She could hear Anthony's voice, gentle and patient as he spoke with a child. She waited, her heart pounding softly, each beat a reminder of everything that had brought her here. A minute later, Anthony appeared, his eyes lighting up when he saw her. "Megan," he said, a smile breaking across his face. Hey," she replied, her voice quiet but steady. He walked over, his hands slipping into the pockets of his scrubs. "How did it go?" She took a deep breath, the words coming easier than she expected. "I said goodbye, for real this time." His eyes searched hers, looking for any lingering pain. "And how do you feel?" "Lighter," she admitted, a small smile curving her lips. "Like I can finally breathe again," he exhaled, his shoulders relaxing. "I'm glad. You deserve that." She stepped closer, her gaze softening. "I realized something today. I spent so long holding on to the idea of what could have been that I forgot to see what's right in front of me." Anthony's eyes held hers, his voice gentle. "And what's in front of you?" "You," she whispered. "You and Connor and Owen. This life I'm building here. It's real. It's good. And it's what I want." He smiled, his eyes shining. "I want that too, more than anything." She reached out, her fingers brushing against his hand. He took her hand in his touch warm and reassuring for the first time in what felt like forever. She didn't feel afraid. "I'm not perfect," she said softly. "I'm still figuring things out, but I want to try. I want to see where this goes." Anthony's thumb traced gentle circles on her palm. "That's all I could ever ask for." He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away, but she didn't. Her eyes fluttered closed as his lips met hers in a kiss that was soft, tender, and full of quiet promise. It wasn't a kiss that demanded or rushed. It was patient and true, a kiss that spoke of new beginnings and second chances. When they pulled back, her heart was racing, but this time, it was with joy, not fear. Anthony grinned, his forehead resting gently against hers. "I think we're going to be okay," she smiled, her eyes shimmering with happy tears. "Yeah, I think so too." Later that evening, Megan sat on the clinic's front steps, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Connor and Owen played tag on the sidewalk, their laughter echoing through the cool night air. Anthony sat beside her, his shoulder pressed against hers. "Thank you," she said quietly. He glanced at her, brow furrowed. "For what?" "For being patient, for being here, for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." He smiled, his fingers intertwining with hers. "You're worth believing in." "Megan," her heart swelled, the truth of his words sinking deep for so long, She'd let the scars of the past define her, but now she was beginning to see herself through Anthony's eyes. Not broken, but whole. Not lost, but found. Connor and Owen raced back over, their cheeks flushed, eyes sparkling with mischief. "Can we get ice cream?" Owen asked, bouncing on his toes. Anthony chuckled. "It's pretty cold for ice cream, buddy." Connor pouted. "Please." Megan laughed, the sound light and free. "I think we can make an exception," the boys cheered, running ahead as Megan and Anthony stood, their hands still joined. The streetlights flickered on, casting a warm glow over the pavement. Megan looked around, taking in the simple beauty of the moment. The joy, the love, the life she never thought she'd have. She squeezed Anthony's hand, her smile reaching her eyes. For the first time in a long while, the future felt bright and boundless. She was free, and she was finally home. The small ice cream parlor buzzed with cheerful energy. The scent of sugar and waffle cones filled the air, a sweet contrast to the chill outside. Connor and Owen pressed their noses to the glass display case, their eyes wide as they debated the endless options of flavors. Megan stood beside Anthony, their shoulders brushing, the warmth of his presence a steady anchor. She found herself smiling more easily now, the knots in her chest loosening with each passing day. The past felt like a closed chapter, one she had finally tucked away on a shelf, making room for a new story, one she was writing with every step she took forward. "I think I want the chocolate fudge swirl," Connor announced triumphantly. Owen furrowed his brow in thought, his tiny fingers tapping his chin. "I want the one with the rainbow sprinkles," Anthony chuckled. "Two solid choices." The teenager behind the counter grinned as he scooped the ice cream into colorful cups. "Anything for you two?" he asked, glancing at Megan and Anthony. Megan met Anthony's eyes. "Vanilla with caramel." He smiled. "You remembered." "Of course I did." She ordered her usual, strawberry with a hint of lemon, and paid for the treats, as they all settled into a corner booth. Connor and Owen attacked their ice cream with pure glee, their laughter filling the small space. Megan watched them, her heart swelling with a quiet joy she hadn't known she was capable of feeling again. Anthony caught her gaze, his eyes soft. "You're happy?" She nodded, the realization washing over her like a gentle wave. "I really am." For so long, she had carried the weight of what could have been, the sting of rejection and broken dreams. But now, sitting here with Anthony and the twins, she saw a different future, one she hadn't planned for, but one that felt more real and precious than anything she'd imagined. "I didn't think I'd get here," she admitted quietly. "I didn't think it was possible to feel this whole again." Anthony reached across the table, his fingers brushing against hers. "You deserve every bit of it." She squeezed his hand, a tear slipping down her cheek. But this time, it wasn't a tear of sorrow. It was a tear of gratitude, of healing, of hope. Owen suddenly piped up, his mouth ringed with rainbow sprinkles. "Does this mean you're gonna stay with us forever?" Megan, her breath caught, and her eyes flicked to Anthony. His expression was steady, his eyes filled with patience and love. There was no pressure, only an invitation to take another step forward. She turned back to Owen, her voice soft but sure. "If you'll have me," Connor whooped, his spoon clattering against the table. "Yes, you're part of the team now." Owen grinned, his eyes sparkling. "Forever." She nodded, her smile trembling. "Forever." The boys cheered, and Anthony's hand tightened around hers. The word hung in the air between them, a promise that didn't feel rushed or forced. It felt natural, like it had been waiting for them all along. The walk back to Claire's apartment was slow and peaceful. The city lights twinkled above them, the air filled with the faint scent of roasting chestnuts from a nearby vendor. Connor and Owen skipped ahead, their laughter ringing like bells in the crisp night air. Anthony slipped his arm around Megan's waist, pulling her close. "You know, I've been thinking." "Uh-oh," she teased, leaning into him. "That sounds dangerous." He chuckled, his breath warm against her temple. "Nothing too dangerous. I've been thinking about what forever might look like." She looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. "And what does it look like?" His smile softened. "It looks like moments like this. Simple, joyful, waking up next to you, helping the boys grow up, building something together that feels like home. Her heart squeezed, the vision so beautiful it almost hurt. I want that too. They stopped at the steps to Claire's building. The boys had run ahead. Already clambering inside, Anthony turned to face her, his hands resting on her hips. The streetlight above them cast a golden glow, illuminating the sincerity in his eyes. "Then let's take forever, one day at a time," he said. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she smiled, the weight in her chest lifting completely. "I'd like that." He leaned in, his lips brushing against hers in a kiss that tasted like hope and new beginnings. She melted into him, the world around them fading away. In that moment, the doubts, the fears, the pain of the past, all of it dissolved into the night. When they finally pulled back, Anthony's eyes shimmered with the same tears she felt on her cheeks. "Ready to go inside?" he asked, his voice a soft rumble. She nodded. "Yeah, let's go home." Hand in hand, they climbed the steps together, the future stretching out before them, bright and boundless. The warmth of the morning sun seeped through the window of Claire's apartment. Casting a golden glow across Megan's face, she blinked, letting the light pull her gently from sleep. The sounds of the city waking up filtered in through the thin walls. Car horns, footsteps on the pavement, snippets of conversation. For once, those sounds didn't feel harsh or overwhelming. They felt alive, vibrant, like she was part of the world again. She stretched beneath the covers, her body relaxing into the soft mattress. The faint aroma of coffee drifted in from the kitchen. A smile tugged at her lips. Claire was already up, which meant the day was about to begin with caffeine and a dose of her friend's good-natured teasing. As Megan slipped out of bed and padded to the kitchen, she found Claire leaning against the counter, a mug in her hand and a knowing smile on her face. "Morning, sleepyhead," Claire said, her eyes twinkling. "Late night." Megan rolled her eyes, grabbing a mug and pouring herself coffee. "We just talked. And walked. It was nice." Claire raised an eyebrow. "Nice, that's all you've got." Megan chuckled, warmth spreading through her chest. "Okay, it was more than nice. It was perfect." Claire's grin widened. "That's what I thought." They sipped their coffee in comfortable silence. Megan stared out the window, watching the sunlight glint off the rooftops. The city felt different now, less like a place she was hiding, and more like a place she belonged. "You know," Claire said, breaking the silence, "you've come a long way, Meg. I'm proud of you." Megan's eyes softened. "I couldn't have done it without you." Claire waved a hand. "I just gave you a couch and some coffee. You did the hard part." Megan smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Still, thank you." Claire tilted her head. "So, what's next? You and Anthony seem pretty solid. Are you thinking about something more permanent?" Megan's fingers tightened around her mug. The question sent a ripple of uncertainty through her, not because she doubted her feelings, but because the idea of forever still felt fragile, like a delicate glass ornament she was afraid to drop. "I don't know," she admitted. "I mean, yes, I want to be with him, but everything still feels so new. I'm scared of messing it up." Claire nodded, her expression thoughtful. "That makes sense, but you don't have to have all the answers right now. Just follow your heart." Megan took a deep breath, the warmth of the coffee seeping into her fingers. Follow your heart. It sounded so simple, yet it was the hardest thing she'd ever done. Her phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at the screen and smiled when she saw Anthony's name. "Come by the park. The boys want to see you." Her heart fluttered, the fear momentarily quieting. "I think I know what my heart wants." Claire's smile was soft. "Then go get it." The park was alive with the sound of children laughing and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. Megan spotted Anthony near the swings, Connor and Owen dashing across the grass, their laughter bright and free. Anthony turned as she approached, his face lighting up. Hey," she replied, the tension in her chest easing as she looked at him. Just being near him made everything feel simpler, clearer. Connor and Owen noticed her and sprinted over, their faces beaming. "Megan!" they shouted, barreling into her legs. She laughed, ruffling their hair. "Hey, you two! Come play with us," Connor begged, tugging on her hand. Owen nodded eagerly. "We need more people for tag." She glanced at Anthony, who smiled and shrugged. You heard them. You're part of the team now." Her heart swelled at his words. Part of the team. It was a simple phrase, but it carried so much weight. It spoke of belonging, of trust, of love. "All right," she said, grinning. "You're on." The next hour was a blur of running, laughter, and the pure joy of being in the moment. Megan's cheeks hurt from smiling and her legs ached, but she felt alive in a way she hadn't in years. Every laugh, every shout, every glance at Anthony filled her with a deep, abiding sense of peace. Finally, they collapsed onto a blanket under a large oak tree, breathless and happy. The boys lay sprawled out beside them, their energy spent. Anthony turned to her, his gaze soft. "I love seeing you like this." She met his eyes, her heart pounding. "I love feeling like this." He took her hand, his fingers warm and steady. "Megan, I know things haven't been easy for you, but I want you to know that I'm here, for you, for the boys, for whatever comes next." Tears welled in her eyes, but they were tears of joy, of release. "I want that too, Anthony. I want to build something with you. I want to stop being afraid of the future." He smiled, his eyes shimmering. "Then let's build it. Together." A tear slipped down her cheek, and he wiped it away with his thumb. "No more looking back," he whispered. She nodded, her smile trembling. "Only forward." He leaned in, and their lips met in a kiss that tasted like promises, like hope, like forever. Around them, the world continued to spin. But in that moment, they were still, wrapped in each other and the love that had found them both. And for the first time, Megan knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. Megan stood by the window of her new apartment, the morning sun streaming in and casting warm golden patches across the wooden floor. The space was small but filled with light. The walls painted a soft cream that made everything feel fresh and full of promise. A stack of moving boxes sat in the corner, waiting to be unpacked. But she wasn't in a rush. For once, she felt like she had all the time in the world. She sipped her coffee, savoring the quiet, the peaceful rhythm of her heart. The old ache that used to gnaw at her chest had faded, replaced by something steadier, more resilient. The future no longer felt like a fragile dream. It felt like a canvas she could paint with her own colors. The door creaked open and Anthony appeared, balancing 2 cups of coffee and a bag of pastries. His scrubs were slightly wrinkled, his hair tousled from the wind, but his smile was bright and easy. "Breakfast delivery," he said, holding up the bag. "I figured you could use some fuel for the unpacking marathon." She chuckled, taking the bag from him. "You're a lifesaver." He leaned in and pressed a soft kiss to her forehead. "I aim to please." They sat on the floor, the coffee cup steaming between them as they tore into the flaky pastries. Megan watched him, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the way his presence filled the room with quiet warmth. "I still can't believe this is my place," she said, glancing around. "It feels like a dream." Anthony's gaze softened. "You've earned this, Megan. You've worked so hard to build a new life." She nodded, emotion welling up in her chest. "I couldn't have done it without you." He reached out, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "You did the hard part. I just reminded you that you weren't alone." A knock at the door interrupted them, followed by the unmistakable sound of giggling. Megan grinned and opened the door to find Connor and Owen, their faces flushed with excitement. Claire stood behind them, holding a potted plant and smiling broadly. "Housewarming delivery," Claire announced, handing Megan the plant. "Every new home needs a bit of greenery." Connor and Owen barreled inside, immediately inspecting the apartment. "Is this your new place, Megan?" Connor asked, his eyes wide. "Yep," she said, smiling. "What do you think?" "It's awesome," Owen declared, peeking into the empty cabinets. "Where's our room?" Anthony chuckled, ruffling Owen's hair. "I think you have to negotiate that with Megan." Megan laughed, the sound light and free. "We'll see what we can do." Claire set the plant on the windowsill, her eyes shimmering with pride. "I'm so happy for you." "Meg." "Thank you, Claire," Megan whispered, pulling her friend into a hug. "For everything." Claire squeezed her tightly. "You don't have to thank me. You deserve this happiness." The afternoon passed in a blur of laughter, unpacking, and the chaos of Connor and Owen discovering every corner of the new apartment. By the time the sun dipped low in the sky, The space was beginning to feel like a home. Books lined the shelves, photos sat on the mantel, and the scent of fresh-baked cookies filled the air, thanks to Claire's impromptu baking session. As the boys settled on the floor with a board game, Megan leaned against the counter, watching them with a sense of wonder. This life she was building, this simple, beautiful life, felt more precious than any dream she'd once had. Anthony joined her, his arm slipping around her waist. "You look happy," he said softly. "I am," she replied, her voice full of certainty. "For the first time in a long while, I really am." He kissed her temple, his lips lingering. "You know, I've been thinking about that word you used before. Forever." Her heart fluttered. "What about it?" He took her hands, his eyes serious but filled with love. "I want that forever with you, with the boys, with everything we're building together." Tears welled in her eyes, but they were tears of joy. "Me too." A knock on the door made them both jump. Megan wiped her eyes and opened it to find a courier holding an envelope. "Megan Taylor?" he asked. "Yes," she replied, taking the envelope. The courier nodded and left. Megan closed the door, her fingers trembling slightly as she turned the envelope over. Her name was scrawled in familiar handwriting, Benjamin. She felt Anthony's hand on her shoulder. "Do you want to open it?" She took a deep breath and nodded, with careful fingers. She tore the envelope open and unfolded the letter inside. "Dear Megan, I wanted to give you one last thing, the freedom to be happy. I know now that my choices hurt you in ways I can never repair, but I also know that you deserve joy, love, and a future without shadows. I hope you find everything I was too blind to see. Thank you for loving me once. I'm finally letting go, and I hope you are too." Benjamin. Megan exhaled slowly. The final weight she didn't know she was still carrying lifting from her shoulders. She folded the letter and set it aside. "Are you okay?" Anthony asked gently. She smiled, her eyes bright. "Yeah, I am." He pulled her into his arms, holding her close. The laughter of Connor and Owen filled the air, the golden light of the setting sun spilling across the room. The past was behind her. The future was in front of her. And in this moment, surrounded by love, Megan knew she was finally free.